Palworld's 2-week expiration date passed by a long time ago, right? It wasn't even a flavor of the month title, right? It lasted for about half of that, where like everybody was saying Palworld was gonna kill Pokemon. It was gonna be this huge deal. It was gonna have merch. It was gonna outsell Pokemon. It was gonna be way bigger than anything Game Freak could produce. And here we are, after Pokemon Day, and Pow World has been completely forgotten. Other than like a handful of like YouTubers who are trying to trick people into thinking that the 97% player drop off is normal. like uh Pow World has been completely forgotten, and the cope that people are going to come back when the game leaves early access is just nothing more than a cope, right? Like the game is never going to be relevant. It's never going to recover from this. It is done. And I do think a big portion of the Pokemon community has kind of turned on the game and kind of like have started acknowledging that it was all the game's problems, all of its issues, the fact that like Pokemon does it better, right? Like there's just no real defending Pow World unless you're some uh, mongoloid streamer like hiding behind an anime girl avatar who thinks that like, oh, Pokemon should be more like this, right? Like outside of that demographic of people, like Pow World essentially has no audience, right? It's not really a game per se. It's just an idea that people were sold to uh what's the best way to put it? To lash out at the Pokemon company, right? It was something that people could get behind to try and dethrone Pokemon as the biggest brand in the world. And I do think that's what this is all about, right? Because this has been happening all generation, right, with Pokemon, right? Ever since Let's Go came out, there's been like this big like rush of people trying to downplay the Pokemon IP, try to say it's disappointing, try to say that like Game Freak has like lost the plot and they don't know what they're doing. The brand has been in the free fall for years, right? Like I do think it is because like the Switch has like made the jump to home consoles, right? Uh, Previously, when Pokemon was handheld exclusive, like game journalists were able to just write the games off as just being like kid friendly, like trash that nobody would remember like 10, 15 years from now, right? Like people were able to like just kind of let Pokemon do its own thing and let the real games like take center stage, right? The Halos, the Call of Duties, like The Last of Us, right? Those were the games that got all the awards and accolades at the time while Pokemon was like slowly building an audience and becoming the biggest brand in the world, right? So when Pokemon like suddenly made the jump to consoles, these people flipped. Like outside of Call of Duty and like the Grand Theft Auto releases, nothing outsells Pokemon. And because Grand Theft Auto's games are so infrequent, like basically only Call of Duty can like consistently outsell Pokemon. And of course, Call of Duty can't compete with Pokemon and merch or with like spin-off material or with like adaptions and stuff like that. Like Pokemon wrecks them both in that regard, right? You get a lot more valuable value out of the Pokemon IP with like all the shows you've watched, all the movies you've seen, all the comics you read, all the cards you bought all the games you got than you ever would off of like Grand Theft Auto 5 online, right? Pokemon is objectively a better IP, but like we can't allow that to be seen like as the standard, right? Like we saw this with like Zelda as well, right? Where people are like still stubbornly kind of refusing to admit that like Zelda is the best video game fantasy IP in the world, right? When it comes to like that brand of action adventure game, like it's not that isn't supposed to be the case, right? Everyone props up Witcher 3, everyone props up like Baldur's Gate 3 now. Everyone's trying to try to find something that's like going to be able to dethrone Zelda, right? It's been happening for decades and nothing's really been able to do it. But there's always this like line of thinking from these people that like, oh, Zelda, it used to be good, but it fell off. And it's the same exact argument they're using now for Pokemon, right? Mario games got that with the new Super Mario Bros. Games, where they were hugely successful, but we were told all through those generations that through that generation that like, oh, it's just the same thing over and over again. Nintendo doesn't know how to innovate, but in reality, like they put out Mario Wonder, and it kind of put what they were trying to do with New Super Mario Bros. In perspective, right? Like again, both of those games are fantastic, And like we saw the game journalists try very hard to downplay both, right? We're seeing people like downplay Metroid now. Like I've seen people like compare Samus Aran to Stellar Blade, like, oh, like this is what Nintendo could have done with Samus if they actually cared about the character. Like it's like, come on, like it's just like you constantly see this from these people where they constantly find like something that's like vaguely similar to some other Nintendo property, and they try to say that like that thing is way bigger and better than like that Nintendo thing, right? Pizza Tower and Wario Land is a good example, and like Palworld and Pokemon. Like it's just like it's very very obvious that Pokemon is like far more successful than Palworld, right? That Palworld has fallen off, that it's not going to go anywhere. I think Pocket Pair is confirmed they're looking to getting acquired, probably in an attempt to mitigate the damages when Nintendo comes after them for infringing on their brand. But like when you look at like what Pal World is doing, right? When you look at how like in the past month they've put out like one Pal, right? And like it didn't do anything to revitalize the game. Right? When you look at what they're doing, like you understand that there's no way this game is going to be viable long term, right? Like the game is in early access. Everyone who bought the game day one is not going to pay for the game again, right? Like they're going to expect it to be finished, right? So if the game ever leaves early access, which it will not, if the game ever leaves early access, like, are people going to pay for the full release? No, it just simply isn't going to happen. The game isn't going to have the momentum. It's not going to be relevant. And I think what's more important, it will not be able to have a sequel. They are wasting their valuable time and development resources supporting a game that nobody is playing anymore, right? The numbers are going down all the time. Even with like the game journals doing everything in their power to try and like trick people into thinking the game is still very popular, the reality is that like Palworld failed at what it was meant to do. Right, it was meant to destabilize the Pokemon IP. It was supposed to like get Pokemon fans on board with PC gaming. It was supposed to get people like moving away from the Nintendo hardware to like the glorious PC Master Race. But instead, what happened? Pokemon Day came around and everybody started getting hyped for Legend ZA. Right, that is the current situation we're in. Pokemon fans are always going to be excited for the real thing, not a cheap copycat from a bootleg studio that needs to be shut down by the law.